Hello, this is Hamlet, and this is my Gold Challenge Mode guide to Bloodmaul Slag Mines. This is a pretty interesting zone with a variety of routes you can take. We're going to show a route here that seemed pretty efficient and got us done with a good amount of time left, especially since this run had some irregularities in it. We're still going to open with a somewhat tough trash pull, pulling the first two packs on this bridge. This will be your introduction to 3 of the types of ogres in this zone. First are the Enforcers. They have a large slam in a cone in front of them that anyone has to watch for, especially the tank. Enforcers also can't be stunned, so keep that in mind whenever you're using your AoE stuns. They also put an armor debuff on the tank. Next are the 2 Slavers. You'll see these throughout the zone. They have a self-enrage that can be tranquilized. It's a pretty significant one, 40% damage done, so if you have anyone in the group who can remove it, it can be good to pop it off right away. The pack also had an Overseer, which we'll see another one of right in the next pack. We're going to start by going left once we get to the main circle and head towards the furnace. There's a pack of 3 mobs standing here right when we turn. We're going to pull them back as we start so that the patrol of 2 Enforcers doesn't walk into us. We grip the Geomancer to us because it's a caster. The most important type of mob to interrupt for now is the Geomancer. It puts a shield up on itself or allies called Stone Bulwark, which essentially means you can't damage that target unless you either interrupt it or dispel the shield. It also casts a bolt that does some damage which you can interrupt. Keep an eye on that throughout the zone. There's also 1 Slaver that you're already familiar with. Finally, the Overseer, which has 2 casts. The first is Subjugate, which is a 10-second dispellable stun, so interrupting it is slightly better, but otherwise you can dispel it right away. And then Suppression Field, which puts down one of these purple circles on the ground that silences anyone standing in it. It's always on the healer, so if your healer keeps the Overseer targeted or focused, they can move in advance or be stepping out of it as it appears, and generally try not to drop it in a way that blocks off any casters. As we finish off this pack, we're going to move forward and pull the patrol of 2 Enforcers and one of the Slavers along the wall. Depending on your route, you may have to pick up some extra Slaver kills at some point during the zone like we do. We'd planned to get 1 in this hallway, and we just pulled the closest one when we get the Enforcers. Putting them together makes for a pretty easy pull. It winds up being an easier version of the one we did on the opening bridge. It works out conveniently since we got to use all our cooldowns for the one at the start, and then do these 2 smaller trash pulls, and then our 3-minute cooldowns will roughly be back up when we get to the start of the furnace. After killing these 2 Enforcers, we're going to walk by 2 more Slavers on the left side of the path. You can walk by all 3 if you wanted, depending on what you plan to use for mob count. Now when we get to the furnace, the goal is to first make your way to the Magma Lord and kill that, which stops the spawns in the front half of the furnace, but it's quite a lot to pull all of the mobs in the first half, including 2 large elementals along with the Magma Lord. We're going to stop and pull the front pulls in the furnace, including 2 large elementals, kill them, and then go on to the Magma Lord. In addition to the 2 significant non-respawning mobs, the Molten Earth Elemental and the Vengeful Magma Elemental, there will be a bunch of continuous spawns of smaller enemies that I referred to, these little searing embers, as well as unstable magma elementals that occasionally work their way down the hallway. Those continue to spawn throughout the furnace until you kill certain key mobs. But what you want to focus on are the large Magma Elemental and Earth Elemental so you can move on. The Earth Elemental has Lava Arc, which is a small cone in front of it. The Magma Elemental is generally better to try to get down quickly. It casts Cinder Splash, which you can't stop, which produces a few extra Searing Embers. You're basically going to be dealing with Searing Embers and these unstable Magma Elementals that occasionally wear themselves down pretty much constantly. As soon as the big ones are down, you want to start killing the Magma Lord. It puts these tornadoes around itself. You can't really do anything about them other than try to avoid them. If you want to make the Magma Lord move, you have to interrupt it, which is generally good to do when there are a lot of tornadoes around your melee and tank. Other than that, you simply work this one down while picking up the occasional ember spawns that'll still happen until it dies. We used our Bloodlust here at the beginning of the furnace. We hadn't timed the zone out exactly, and we wanted to make sure it was back up for Roltall. We probably could have used it on the hard trash pull at the end of the furnace and still had it up for that boss, but that's something you can check for your group. Once the Magma Lord is down, you can go either left or right around the center. Each side will have a Vengeful Magma Elemental. The left also has this bizarre hanging mob that you'll see in a second that doesn't do anything, but you can shoot it down for a free mob kill. We wind up doing that for mob count purposes. Even though the spawns of embers and unstable elementals from the front half stopped when we killed a Magma Lord, there's still going to be ones coming from the back half that you have to deal with throughout this and the whole time you killed a hard upcoming trash pack. So you may have been able to get a short combat break after the Magma Lord if you needed one, but now you're probably not going to get one until you're about to pull the boss. This upcoming trash pull will have your first Warder. That has a castable AoE fear that generally must be interrupted. It also introduces the Ogre Mage. That regularly casts Lava Burst, which you want to interrupt reasonably often to cut down on damage to the tank. More importantly, it casts Blood Rage, a buff to the entire party of mobs that makes them immune to CC and interrupts, so it's critical to purge it off of anything that you have to interrupt, for example, a warder. This is the first of 2 pulls where you're going to have Ogre Mages buffing a warder, and ideally the same person can be assigned to immediately purge and interrupt the warder whenever necessary. It becomes harder to coordinate that purge and interrupt if it's from 2 separate people. We do wind up having a fear go off here, which is pretty bad, especially because I'm in range, so I get behind on this already hard pack. If you've listened to my healing podcast, you've heard me say that Tranquility isn't the greatest spell in challenge modes because you save the party at the cost of letting the tank die, so I made that decision at this point and immediately rebirth him, and we continue on. This pack also had a Magma binder, which casts lava bursts of its own and a dispellable slow. At this point we notice a goofy little bug while the party's finishing up the last spawn that appeared before we killed the pack, which is that I have this unattackable, untargetable Searing Ember on me. I don't really know where it came from. We all get distracted mulling over this for a little while before pulling the boss, but eventually we decide no one has a way of getting it off me and we can't drop combat, so we may as well just pull. I wind up being distracted for a little ways into the boss fight trying to figure out if I can get it cleaved down or something. Anyway, hopefully that doesn't happen to you. The first phase of Magmaladus is the Forgemaster, who's not very hard. Other than throwing out some fire that you have to dodge, he summons 2 adds over the course of the fight: Ruination, an Earth Elemental, and Calamity, a Fire Elemental. Ruination does a cone-shaped smash in front of him, so the tank wants to pick him up and face him in a good direction. Calamity stands still and casts. He has a very important cast, Firestorm, which you want to interrupt immediately as it starts. It's a long channel. He also otherwise just casts Scorches, which you can interrupt or Darksam or do whatever you want at your leisure. Ruination does this 4-way Earth Spike on the ground that I got killed by there in my distraction with this add thing. I was actually kind of disappointed to find out that the bugged add still didn't go away. Finally, Calamity also has his debuff, Dancing Flames, that on challenge mode he casts on 2 people simultaneously. The tooltip said it ticks out for 6 seconds and then jumps to a new target. Most of the time if you let one expire, I don't see it jump, so I'm not sure what's going on there, but you definitely don't need a double Dispel glyph if you are tempted to use one for this zone. In fact, it's not good to use one for this zone because it's actually worse at the final boss. 1 Dispel is perfectly fine for dealing with the double debuff, and as I've shown here, 0 Dispels is quite acceptable as well. I think we just hadn't bothered rezzing me because we thought we weren't going to be able to finish the zone with this bugged add thing. We wouldn't be able to get out of combat to invis, but fortunately we continued trying. The rest of Forgemaster is quite easy once the 2 adds are down, and when you kill him you move on to phase 2, which is Magmaladus himself. Magmaladus periodically casts Molten Impact, which damages the whole party and summons one of these molten elementals. They have very little HP, so it's not much of a loss to just blow them up quickly, and if you do, they practically never get any of their casts off, which makes the fight pretty easy. If they're up, they'll occasionally put down fire pools that people have to move out of, and a linear fire attack that people have to dodge. Unless the boss is almost dead, it's easy enough to just kill these, and you may well get a DPS benefit out of it from nobody having to move. Magmaladus also puts a debuff on people Withering Flames. Just pop that off right away. If it sticks around, it can jump to a debuff that puts a slow on people. Even in challenge mode, he only casts 1 at a time, so there's no problem getting that. Finally, he occasionally puts a circle on the ground around him that the tank and melee have to dodge out of. It's pretty easy to see. It's a big cloud. As long as you keep handling those few things, you just want to focus on getting him down quickly. This fight is a little long between the 2 phases put together, and even if you used some 3-minute cooldowns on the trash pack just before, you may have some up for this fight, and it's fine to use them here in a double pot and everything else. We just have a little basic trash coming up after this before the next boss. Once he's down, we're going to turn around and run all the way back out of the furnace. The way this zone is set up, there's no way to avoid some amount of backtracking, so we're going to do it here. It is possible to invis part of the furnace if that's your choice, and then the only way out is to die and get ported back to the start, which is not completely unreasonable, but we thought that other places in the zone were more effective to use the invis, as you'll see later. Fortunately, as we exit the furnace, we drop combat, so I guess that mysterious bugged mob finally went away. Someone does accidentally pull 1 slaver at the corner that we had left up. That's something to watch for depending on which ones you leave up. It's not really a big deal. It's a little bit wasteful to spend time killing 1 solo mob, but we can cut out the slaver later from a place we had planned to pull one, so it's only a minor loss. As I was saying before, there are a lot of different ways you can route this zone depending on which order you kill Magmalatus and Crushto, and which quadrant you choose to double back in. You can even choose to loop around the top and clear that way to get between the two bosses and things like that. We liked this route though because it kills a lot of easy trash pulls in the south half of the zone, skips a very hard trash pull on the bridge right before Roltall, and still makes our mob count without killing any giant Ogron, which you'll see later on in the zone. This quadrant on the way to Crushto has nothing too hard in it. There's 1 Enforcer and 3 Slavers. We pull 2 here, the third is there sleeping just ahead of us. You can pull all 3 together if you want, but that can be a lot of tank damage. We didn't see a need to. You clear these out, and as one is dying, we move up to pull the third and get into position to pull the pack after this. A lot of the trash in this zone is in the form of high HP ogres, so divvying it up into good size pulls of 3 or so and getting good cleave on it will keep up your pace through the entire zone. The remaining pulls between here and Crushto are also all mob types that you've seen before. Enforcers, Geomancers, Warders, Ogre Mages, and Overseers, all the same types of ogres that are scattered throughout this entire zone. The first pull in Crushto's wing is a Geomancer, an Overseer, and an Enforcer. There are a lot of different interruptible mobs and spells in all this kind of trash, and being organized about it is important. You have to know which things are the most important priorities to interrupt, as well as who's going to interrupt what, which is something that should generally be coordinated during your practice runs. Generally, the most important mobs to interrupt are warders because of their fear. As you saw earlier in the zone, even one going off can cause a lot of trouble. Make sure that you know who's assigned to interrupt one of those in every pull that has one. Also important are the Geomancers. You don't want their shield to keep going off and cutting into your DPS. They also have a cast that does a reasonable amount of damage that's nice to stop. The Overseers aren't quite as important. Subjugate can be dispelled even though interrupting it is better, and your healer can always simply move out of suppression field. It's nice to throw spare interrupts depending on what's there, but interrupt other mobs first. Finally, the Ogre Mages, which add to the complexity of the interrupt puzzle by putting that immunity buff on everyone like I mentioned. This is the second time in the zone, if you follow our route, where you'll find Ogre Mages and a Warder together. So make sure that someone is ready to purge interrupt the Warder, because there are 2 mages casting a shield is easier if someone is just ready to purge right when the interrupt is needed. And people should still purge Ogre Mages when they have a spare moment so that they become interruptible, because letting every lava burst go off will add up to quite a lot of damage on your tank. When you're fighting this pull and the one before it, by the way, at the entrance to Crushto's room, watch out for a 2-mob patrol in the hallway to the north that walks quite close. If you stand where we were, you're fine, but if someone stands a little too far to the left, they can aggro it. On our route, we do pull that patrol, but you probably don't want to accidentally get it while fighting one of these packs. After killing that pack of 3, 2 warders will run in from near Crushto. You're probably going to fight them separately from the boss unless you're really trying to press for time. There's no Ogre Mage here, so there's no interrupt shield, so simply make sure that you have someone assigned to interrupt both. This is the only time you're going to fight 2 warders at once. As you're finishing these mobs and pulling Crushto, you should probably have any 3-minute cooldowns back up that you used at Magmalatus, and you should also be ready to pre-pot once again. This will be people's last DPS potion of the run because our invis is coming up soon afterwards. Worth mentioning that pre-potting out of combat every time possible, especially in a zone like this with a lot of trash pulls that are 1 minute long, is very efficient. You can have surprisingly high potion uptime, and 1000 primary stat is pretty huge when you're in level 630 gear, so you're going to do that often and rarely actually potion in combat except for a long boss like Magmalatus. So Crushto, first of all, most importantly, has a very important interrupt called Ferocious Yell. Make sure people have a rotation for that. It's also possible that you want to have a ranged backup for when he does it immediately after knocking people back, because in addition to Ferocious Yell, which damages the whole group and buffs himself, he does Wild Slam, which is unavoidable and damages the whole group and knocks everyone back. The healing is generally not bad though if you never have a Ferocious Yell go off. In addition to those, there will be Earth Crush, where a spike pops out of the ground in the direction of a random person, and then he kicks it towards the person, stunning everyone in that line. So you don't necessarily want your ranged all on top of each other, although we kind of liked being on the similar side, so that we all moved in the same direction against a wall when you got knocked back, and the spike is not that hard to dodge anyway. Sometimes he winds up in a weird position, spiking you after he leaps to someone and roots them, but that's pretty much the only combination that's tricky. Finally, he occasionally summons miners. They're small mobs that will start to run after the person Crushto leapt to, or sometimes after the healer. Make sure the tank picks them up. They do put a damage taken debuff on the tank, so they really can increase the damage on him, even if they don't do that much on their own. It helps if anyone who can cleave efficiently occasionally clears out the miners so that that stack resets every now and then. You generally want to keep damage on the boss, but hopefully you can clear him out occasionally, mostly for free. We're now going to pull this patrol of 2 mobs, which is going to be the last 2 that we kill before invising. We'd normally kill a third, which is a slaver that's in a little alcove on our left right near us, but because we accidentally pulled the one earlier, it's just going to be these 2. It's a geomancer and an overseer that you've seen before. It's not that hard with a slaver in it either. The goal is just to get it down quickly and then move on to the invis run. Because this usually takes less than a minute to kill, that's why we didn't second pot on Crushto. Once these are down, we're going to invis past the remaining pack in the northeast quadrant and the pull of 5 mobs at Roltall's bridge, which only appears when the bridge opens. That's generally the hardest trash pull in the zone, so it was a very attractive one to skip. It's pretty easy to invis here past that and to Roltall. The only tricky part of this invis choice is that the pack will still be up while you're fighting Roltall, and they're right at the end of the bridge, so you can't use the back half of the bridge for fear of aggroing them. This is okay though, because the front near the boss is the most convenient place for ranged and healers to stand anyway. It gives you the most time between when a rock rolls by and when it rolls back. You can't be right under the boss because he has a cast slow aura, but you can be pretty close like we are here. So when you see where the first boulder goes by, you can generally wait in the path where it was, while at least the next one launches, and really by the time the one after is starting to launch, and then move away from where the first one went by as it rolls back, and then you can move back into the lane where the first one was, and then you're done while the other 2 come back. So if you pretty much watch the first one, wait in its lane while it's behind you for the other 2 to roll by, and then simply move out of its way as it comes back, you can pretty much ignore the other 2 rocks. And note that you always get a left, a right, and a center. Not necessarily in that order, but you get one of each, so you never have to worry about another one coming in the same path. He puts down burning slag in completely random locations. That you can't do anything about, and it really can restrict your movement for the second boulders, especially if you have only half of a bridge to work with. You may have to personal or something if you have to move through fire, because it does quite a lot of damage. We had to cut it a bit close there. The middle rock being last can be the trickiest setup. After the second heat wave, he's going to put down a second patch of fire in random locations. Now there's going to be a lot of fire in the different lanes that you want to move around between, and it might become really difficult to dodge a third set of boulders properly. You pretty much want to have the boss dead at this point. We were planning to have the boss dead at this point, but we forgot to bloodlust. He probably would have been dead just about now, but we have to keep going here, and we're going to have a third set of boulders just starting as we finish him off, but fortunately we don't quite get to the point where we have to worry about them all coming back. But if you're having the third set of boulders once there's all this fire, you're pretty much stuck more or less moving through the fire as you try to dodge them. Once he's down, coming up are going to be 3 giant Ogron, and these mobs are huge and take forever to kill, and our goal is simply to skip them. We crafted our route so that we had enough without them, because they're only worth 1 each, and it's not worth the time to kill them compared to taking the time to kill mobs that have less HP. We're going to walk around this first one. As you can see, you can just wait here at the edge of the lava. You can do that even if he's reasonably close by where the boss was. You may have to wait just a little, but it still takes far less time than killing him. And then we come up to these 2, which are sort of a pain to fight together, even more so than the one. If you do have to fight them, it's just heavy tank damage and some AoE. You can root one to mitigate the tank damage and kill them one at a time, but now you're taking even longer to kill them. So you can use anyone in the party who has some sort of immunity to aggro and hold them by themselves over on the right while the rest of the party runs past. If that person is a hunter, like in our case, they can be cute and feign and disengage over the gap. Even if there's someone else though, you can just combat res them if you need to. It's still a lot faster than killing the 2 Ogron. You don't need to do that skip. As you'll see, we would have had the time to finish the zone, but it seemed like the natural route to plan was to just not use those 3 mobs for our mob count. Coming up after this are going to be 4 flame speakers. You don't have to pull them all at once, but they're pretty easy mobs. If you're doing something like rezzing someone who helped you with an Ogron skip, just be careful not to pull the flame speaker prematurely. The Ogron have a pretty small combat radius though, so it's easy to move around. The 4 flame speakers do that channeled cone that you saw. That's pretty much the only significant thing. People at range have to watch for it, just move out if it hits you. It did one tick to me right there. It was easy to move out of, but it was noticeable damage. Those fire sphere things hardly do anything noticeable. I was practically standing in one for a few seconds earlier. You just have to worry about the cone. These mobs are stunnable and interruptible as well, so as long as you're a little bit careful, they really shouldn't be too hard to take care of. Just take them down and then you're looking at the final boss. You should have all your DPS cooldowns up from Roltall, as well as your Lust if you didn't use it there, but as I mentioned before, we intended to use it there, since Roltall is a fight that gets volatile if it goes on longer. Gug'rokk isn't that hard to control if you have generally good positioning. The key thing that drives the positioning is that he periodically makes these fire circles under everyone. So it's good to have a coordinated idea of where you're going to move. We had melee move along the wall, as you can see, and range take a path in the middle that's generally parallel to them. We stay mostly in a clump so that every time fire appears under us, everyone moves together and we make a little line across the middle of the room. Part of the point of this positioning is so that the ranged was in between the boss and the furnace across the room for when these adds spawn. They're always moving past us and are very easy to kill, even with 2 DPS. We're also in position to stun them, knock them back, anything else we want to do as they make their way over. So the adds are totally under control. The only other thing other than the fire on the ground and the slag that you want to kill before it gets buffed by making its way to the end of its path is this flame buffet that puts a magic debuff on everyone in the room, increasing their fire damage. The healer is basically going to want to dispel people sequentially. It's not that stressful, but you want to remember who you've dispelled recently and get the people who are at high stacks. I didn't even do it too well on this pull, and it wasn't a very big deal. Finally, you want to regularly interrupt the boss's Molten Blast. Anytime he completes it, he gets a buff on himself that you want to dispel. It's also okay to occasionally let it complete for Dark Sim or Spell Steal or similar purposes. If you make sure to have that coordinated as well as the positioning, you should have a pretty easy time with this boss. We're finishing him off right here with almost a minute to spare, which is quite good considering some of the issues we had earlier in this run. I think this route makes the mob count efficiently and should give you a lot of time leeway in trying for gold. Good luck in your own attempts, and thank you for watching.